Explorer, you've arrived at the threshold of an epic journey where self-love meets fitness. Gather your courage as we seek to challenge the limits of our bodies, become mentally resilient, and learn to cherish ourselves for the beautiful individuals we are. Along the way, we'll be joined by incredible mentors in the pole and fitness community who will share their wealth of knowledge to help you blossom. This is the Pole Adventures podcast, and your adventure starts now. Welcome, explorers, to another episode of Pole Adventures. I'm your host, Paris, an eternally struggling pole dancer, here to bring you the wisdom of Alicia Archer. Alicia is super passionate about fitness, flexibility, and movement. After working in the dance industry, she was quickly drawn to the circus arts and now specializes in combining bodyweight training with mobility and stretching techniques. As an instructor, she knows the best way to train is by combining specificity, I always struggle over that word, effort, tracking, and consistency. And today we'll be honing in on the effort part of that equation, or rather how to present the incentive for our bodies to change. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Paris. It's an honor, and I'm excited to speak about the topic of effort.
Awesome. But first, I'd love for you to tell us a bit about your pole adventure. What was your why for pole and your flexibility and fitness?
I attended Body and Pole out of curiosity to try aerial silks. I've always seen it around, and I've never found a studio that offered those classes. And when I did, it was like, ooh, I have to go into it. And maybe you had experienced this as well. But once you dive into one module of aerial anything, you automatically get sucked into everything else. So soon after, I found myself in handstand classes, flexibility classes, pole classes. And for a good few years, I dedicated a lot of my time to attending these classes and improving my flexibility and learning how to do inversions, right? So it was a huge shift. Even though I was still teaching classes at the gym, I wasn't doing as much resistance training. I dove head in, body in to all this aerial type of work. So that's how I got started. And of course, I wanted to teach other adults how to become flexible because I realized there was a huge gap between yoga and circus where, you want to get flexible, but maybe you don't want to be a contortionist, and that's okay. And you don't want to attend a yoga class because that approach maybe doesn't align with you either. So I wanted to target that audience that wants to become flexible, but from a more neutral standpoint.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for our fellow nervous beginners, do you have an embarrassing pole moment to share?
Maybe it wasn't in pole, but I'm sure in a lot of inversion classes, probably one time I toppled over, I'm sure, or maybe during a performance, there was a costume malfunction, which often happens, but it's great because it's pole. So that's the perfect environment for it to happen in anyway.
Yeah, everything just slips.
Right. And it's fine. It's fine. It's like, okay, here we are. Indeed.
So, awesome. So maybe you could set the scene by briefly explaining that that process that you went through, the specificity, effort tracking, and consistency.
I could have done a far better job in tracking my progress for sure. Although I did implement a lot of my own suggestions where I recorded myself a lot. I tried to keep track of different skills that I was working on. Of course, one being the handstand. I remember working on it constantly. And I think I could have improved faster if I was more intentional with my training. So at first, I just wanted to get it. So any opportunity I had, I would just try kicking up and try to hold it. And it was until I worked with coaches that the training was more streamlined, it was more precise, and I saw results faster, right? So in pole and aerial, it's funny. I guess it's tougher to track than, let's say, strength training, because with strength training, you have the reps, the sets, and right. And you have your level of difficulty. So this feels like a 7 out of 10 or what have you. With skill-based work, it's difficult because you can keep track of the conditioning portion of your training, right? Like this day I did this many pull-ups and a lot of the pull drills with the knees in, or maybe you drill a lot of the entries where you maybe drill shoulder mount versus outside leg hang and all that stuff. And the lines begin to get blurred because in the end, it's all about refining the technique and just putting it into practice. But I think you can still probably track the conditioning portion a lot more, where, again, you feel stronger in a lot of the pulling movements. And then there's that endurance aspect about it, where if you have to perform a routine, putting several moves together and not feeling out of breath and wanting to die, it's something that there is sure carryover from conditioning that you could do outside the studio. But at the end of the day, is practicing on the pole like all together, because you can't replicate that type of effort. People are like, I need to increase my cardiovascular respiratory health. Sure, you can run on the treadmill, but you probably should still run your routine on the pole, because in the end of the day, that's what you're trying to get better at. And for myself, when I spoke about handstands, yes, I eventually got them, but probably could have been a lot better if I was more intentional. Flexibility, I definitely think there was a lot more room to track, where you could keep note of how long you've held front split attempts, middle split attempts, and also keep track of the different exercises, lunges, low lunge variations, hamstring stuff, hip stretches. So I think flexibility training is easier to track because there's a little more structure there in terms of the different stretches that we know of and we're familiar of. And you could just keep track of how those go, how long you can hold them for, and take photos of yourself. Because if you see yourself in a lunge 6 months out and you're lower, clearly you've improved, right? So that's what I found was helpful. And just being consistent with it, that was number one. Where maybe some weeks I was kicking ass and other weeks not so much, but I still did something that contributed to the overall goal in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And I really loved how you phrased it with the effort part of, in order to make progress, you have to give your body that incentive to make a change. Like, we can't just stretch; we have to make it hard and say practice active flexibility. How did you do that with your journey?
Well, I think we all learn what our pain tolerance is, and it evolves over time, right? And this is something I discovered with my strength training, where we've heard the concept of training to failure, right? Probably not great to do all the time because it is ultra fatiguing, right? It takes a lot out of you. But until you get to that point, that's like your marker of like, okay, this is where I spill over, not going there all the time, but proximity to that is what's important. And knowing what that is, you could just better gauge your own intensity level because you went there, you went to the edge. And I see this all the time when I go to the gym, where people are working out, but they're cruising, right? They're on the phone while they're on the inner thigh machine. And it's like, is that a warm up or is that a work set? Like, what are we doing here?
You're pretending you're warming up.
Right. Just to say, and then they'll be like, I go to the gym all the time and I'm not seeing a damn change. It's like, well, there has to be, yes, there has to be an incentive to change. And there is a fine line, right? I think there are people who worked way too much and too hard. They go balls to the wall every day, and you can't recover from that type of work, from that type of stimulus, and then you start to regress. And I've experienced that where it's just too much and you have to do less because otherwise your progress will be negatively impacted.
Yeah,
But
rest is
at the
important.
end of the day, right?
Rest is important.
Rest is important. Recovery is important. And it's funny, the main pillars of recovery is sleeping and eating. And we try to find other ways to
Get around it.
right? Like, I got to get a massage. I got to get these balls. I got to get these compression. Like, no, you got to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And you got to eat better in terms of nutrition. Like, yes, we need the energy, but we also need the raw materials to build and to help repair. If we're not doing that, all like these other methods, Thai massages are not going to do a thing, right? So, and for instance, for a front split, it could be very uncomfortable, especially if someone is stretching for the first time. I would never recommend that they do a front split attempt if they haven't stretched a day in their life. So I'll take a low lunge, for instance, which could be uncomfortable for many people. Just being on the leg, staying upright, and putting that weight on the back hip. And so as flexibility in general is not great across the population, just from sitting a lot and just having weak, right, hip flexors in general. So if I put them in a lunge and they just want to come out right away, I get it for the first time, but eventually you will have to stay there longer and be uncomfortable. Now, uncomfortable and painful can be two different things. Uncomfortable is something that we don't want to do because it's just that. Painful, I think, is more of like a red flag status where if you keep doing the same stretch and week by week by week, it doesn't feel any better, then something has to change. But it's mostly the uncomfortable part of the equation that people don't want to fully sink their teeth into. And I get it, but that's where the transformation happens, right? That's where you tell your nervous system to say, hey, we're working in this range and I would like you to give me this range. I need you to raise the bar and just let me go through. And until you can sit in that like space of like, okay, we're here 30 seconds instead of just feeling it for 10 seconds and wanting to bail. Sure, you'll get a little bit, right? Yeah, you'll get a little bit of improvement, but not a ton.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any tips for, knowing where that line is? How we can challenge ourselves to make meaningful improvements without going too far, to actually hurt ourselves?
I think it's important to know your breathing and making sure you're aligning with it. So not holding your breath during those intense stretches in through your nose and out through your mouth. I know that sounds obvious, but when our sympathetic nervous system, right, where our fight or flight response starts to kick in, it's natural that we start to get a faster breath, a more uneven one. But we have to then rely on the more even rhythmic breath to downregulate a little bit and tell our nervous system, our body, that it's okay to be in this sensation, especially when it comes to back bending. Forget it. Like, that's probably one of the main challenges I've seen with clients where they do a deep back bend and they just stop breathing completely. It's like, no, probably not great. And I would recommend too that you are in tune with those sensations where if you challenge yourself to stay in a stretch longer than 10 seconds, if 10 seconds was your threshold and you're like, okay, 30 today, and it feels better, that's an indication that you're good to go, right? But if it gets worse, if it's like a joint, ligament, tendon type of a discomfort where, again, you're doing the same stretch for weeks and nothing's changing and it is getting more painful, then probably is a strength issue, an alignment issue, maybe anatomical. You have to find another variation to rely on so you can enter the stretch in a manner that is going to target that muscle, it feel better over time and not worse.
What if you're like just super afraid or really sensitive to that pain?
I would say you have to ask yourself if this is something you want to do, because in the end, you have to realize there's a compromise, right? If you want to become more flexible, there will be a moment of discomfort, several, right? But you could decide if you want to take it farther down the spectrum. If you're looking to practice contortion, you're going to have to get through that pain threshold. There's no other way around it.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? And there are people that love it. They're like masochists and they just want to do that stuff every day. Fine. If you're looking to improve general flexibility, maybe not a requirement for you to go through that pain threshold. Perhaps you're relying on flexibility training to help mitigate your stress, have it as a vehicle for you to sleep better, to kind of chill. Then pain is not a great idea, right? Because if you're looking to do something before bed, maybe you don't want to train splits before bed, right? That's like, that's going to put you in you know what I mean? In a really weird headspace and just get super intense. Now, if you could already do the splits, sure, that's different, right? It's going to be different for everyone depending on where you are in your training. But you have to decide what is it that you want to accomplish. If you're looking to improve your overall general flexibility, there's going to be a little bit of discomfort and you can ease into that slowly. But at the end, you will realize that those moments, that crossroad you encounter all the time, it gets a little better. It gets a little easier. Like, okay, we can stay here a little longer. You don't necessarily have to push through like someone who is looking to dramatically increase their flexibility, who wants the front splits, the middle splits, and the back bends, right? So the requirement or the pain threshold requirement definitely evolves with the goals.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I don't think it's necessary for you to push the limits in a twist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what would you say would be some key factors that help motivate us to make that, make our bodies and minds to make that change?
I think it's something, again, you have to have a conversation with yourself and say, is this something I really want? And if that's yes, then the commitment has to be there. I think, because I've always believed that, yes, motivation and discipline are different. Motivation is fleeting. It will not always be there, right, for you to do the work. And discipline at the end is going to help you push through the days that you don't want to do it. But the motivation, I guess
more than with discipline.
Right, exactly. The motivation is still there because you go back to why you did this in the first place. Like, remember that day you said you really wanted to get your front split? Well, this is something that if you really want, you have to do. And the motivation for me is just that personal incentive. In the end, I think that's going to be the most powerful tool, and why I think is important that you keep track video and photo wise, because when you clearly see improvements over weeks at a time, you're going to stick with it. If you see your split lower after 6 months of dedicated training, you're going to stick with it. And that's why I find it so important that you take videos and photos of yourself. You don't have to post them on social. You don't have to make everything, oh, let me post my training. No, this is for you. Because again, over the timeline, when it gets tough and you're like, do I really want to do this? And you see where you started, it is like a huge boost in motivation. Because then you're like, do I want to start from square one? Do I want to do this process all over again to get where I am now? Because it's a lot easier or let me just say this, they're both tough, but it's not as tough to like do something that you don't feel like, but you do it anyway. You grit your teeth one of those days versus having to start from scratch where you don't do anything for months. And you're like, man, now I got to start all over again. That in itself is motivation for me. I'm not going to go back to that because again, if I work so hard at something that you put the time, money, mind into, body into, there's no way you're going to throw it away. So that for me is a huge source of motivation.
Well, that's actually something that I did myself. I put in a lot of the effort, did it for years, and was trying to. Okay, I probably could have done a bit better on the tracking, but it got really bad mentally. Like, my brain was pushing that narrative, like, you're a failure, you can't do it, people are judging you. And
right.
that things just weren't progressing. Like, inverts, for example, not being able to do it when everybody else was able to do it. And
right.
they all, had started the same time as me and things like that. So that really pulled me out. And even though I really wanted to do it. So what do you do at that point?
I think, well, it's hard to not compare yourself. Totally. When people are like, don't compare yourself, you're like, okay, it's like, don't scratch the mosquito bite. Good luck.
Yeah.
It is tough. There's no way around that. I think you just have to make sure you remember you have your own trajectory. And maybe your approach has to be different from everyone else. Maybe there has to be a technique shift. Maybe you do need to work with the coach versus someone else. And that's okay, right? Like we all learn differently and we get distracted, again, like you said, with our environment and seeing how in general people are getting it without that different route. And just surrendering to the fact that in the end, we all might start the same, but we eventually go different ways and routes when learning, advancing, progressing, and you just happen to take a different route before everyone else will. And that's fine. And I think remembering that in the end, that we're all individuals, whatever that timing is fine. And I know it can be discouraging because you just want to get that thing now. You see all your friends having it now. It's in your grasp. It's just a matter of sticking with it. And again, asking yourself if this is something you really want to do still. Like you said, maybe it is necessary to take a mental break if it's wearing you down. Because if this is something you initially love to do and now is taking away from you from an emotional level, from a spiritual level, then we have to reframe what that thing is for you. Because if it's now sucking you dry when before it was giving you something to love and to thrive on, is it the thing or is it how we're looking at the thing?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point.
Right. So a lot of it probably is reframing on our part because what we were looking to achieve didn't change. How we saw it changed. How we interacted with it changed. And I think the work has to start with ourselves and again saying, okay, this is something I love to do and I still do. Why do I feel this way about it? Oh, because again, I'm not improving like everyone else is at the same rate. Maybe something else, excuse me, allergy season is affecting how I interact with the thing I love to do, whether it's work, relationships, something is in the ether that's not letting this relationship I have, whether with flexibility, training, pole, aerial, not to thrive.
Yeah, I think, me personally, I definitely needed to take that mental break, but hopefully this time around it'll be better. Do you
For sure
have any tips on reframing it?
In the end, you have to ask yourself if this is something I love to do and want to do it long term. What is it going to serve me in that trajectory? Is it going to still make me happy? Do I really love to do this? Did I do this just because my friend wanted me to? So there are a lot of questions. Like, you got to give yourself a little bit of a quiz, I guess. But there is that mentality that we cannot get sucked into, the why me mentality. And I see this a lot, especially with injuries, where people just accept the fact that, okay, you have a bad back, join the club. Like, there are so many people who have bad backs, bad knees, bad whatever. What are you going to do about it? So that's where the reframing begins. You got to get out of the why me mentality and say, okay, what can I do? How can I solve this problem? And that's where the reframing starts. It's not easy. Is an easy application. Oh God, motorcycles. But that's where it has to begin. We have to get out of like the pits of like that victim mentality.
Yeah,
because it is insidious. Right. It can really suck you dry. And before you know it, you're like in the pits and you don't want to do anything. And I know it because I've been there at dance college. I'm going to close my window. Better. Where I was put in a level of ballet solo compared to what my other classmates were. I wasn't able to jump and turn high, turn a lot. Words. It was hard for me to remember choreography. One of my ballet teachers switched me to another class because I wasn't to his expectations. So that kind of did something to my brain. I never got picked to be in any of the pieces. Right. So I was in that victim mentality. I was like, why me? I suck. Like, why did I go to, and I wish I could go back to myself 10 some years ago and say, if you suck at choreography, improve. If you can't jump and turn, find a way to improve your jumping and your turning. But I didn't. I just kept going to class, hoping something will happen. And, I needed to cross train, which also, slight tangent, at the time, we were only encouraged to do yoga or Pilates. And it's like, no, I needed to go on the hamstring curl machine. I needed to do squats. I needed to do lunge. I needed to do stuff that would strengthen my body in order to jump higher and turn faster, because I started later than a lot of my classmates. Ballet was not in my life as a young child. I started as a young adult, so I had a lot of catching up to do. But that was the seed that planted and never derooted. I always came back to that. And it was just one of those things where that was an example for me of how I put myself in that victim mentality. And now retrospectively, I see the different ways where I could have mitigated those effects, that I could have become better. Not saying that I was going to be the best in the class, but I could have had a different mindset and could have reframed it by getting out of like, sorry, get over it, Alicia. You started late, but you are in college. You got to accept it. Like, it's not like you couldn't get your dance degree to begin with. So not all was lost.
So once you're in that problem-solving mindset, how do you go about solving the problem?
You gotta dissect it. You have to start with one point at a time. If it's in the case of pole dancing, picking a skill one at a time to work on. Not getting wrapped up about maybe creating a routine right away. If you wanted to compete, but you might have to delay that, fine. So it's like all these goals that all these expectations, you need to shift. Right? And I think that's what cuts us in the butt, because we get sad when, oh, I wanted to do this, but now I can't. Okay. It's not the end of the world. You might have wanted to perform a routine. You might have wanted to get this skill by May 15th, but it might be August 15th. So the expectation thing, I feel, plays a huge role in trying to problem solve, because you got to change those expectations.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they just bog you down.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any other, common mistakes you see pole dancers making, or, or training their flexibility, when they're trying to progress and not getting there?
Probably doing so much at one time, right? You want to get this skill, you want to get this flexibility. You have to approach things in phases, right? Maybe for a few weeks you work on your front splits, right? But you get frustrated because maybe there's a pole move that requires a lot of shoulder and back flexibility. Well, maybe put it on hold, right? Like, you don't have to get the back and front split flexibility all at the same time. Maybe you could still work on your shoulders, but there has to be a priority, right? Because if you work on everything at the same time, then everything is going to like slow move at the same time. Whereas if you pick something else, you get ahead a little bit. Okay, pick something else that gets ahead a little bit, then pick. That's why I like working in blocks. You listen, I'm not saying you absolutely can be great at everything, but know that there will be a period of time that you put a little more work into one thing and then the other. I think so. The mistake I find people make is they want to do everything at the same time, and there's no, I want to say, specialization. So not that you have to be so anal about working on one thing and not everything else, but if you at least have a little bit of bias, for instance, towards front splits over back bends, let's say for 8 weeks, you could plan better. You could say, this is when I'm working on my front splits. I'll still include some shoulder and back exercises. I'm still going to prioritize my lunge work, my hamstring work. And then after 8 weeks, I'll see where I'm at. And then you flip it. Then you'll bias your training more towards your back bends, which will still improve your splits, or actually splits help improve back bends anyway because of the psoas flexibility requirement. So they all, in the end, help each other. There is tremendous carryover. I think it's just helpful when you have at least a goal, or more so an emphasis. You could just plan better because you know the exercises that are going to help you get to that. And you're able to track better because, all right, these few weeks I'm working on my splits. Let's see how they're looking. All right, next few weeks I'm going to have an emphasis towards middle splits. Let's see how they're looking. And eventually you'll be able to get the moves. You'll be able to feel better. You'll be able to increase your endurance and stamina. Instead of like, I want to work on splits, back bends, and middle splits all in 1 week and then all these pole moves. Like, good luck.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem that I kind of found, moving from, from beginners, you have a very straightforward, you do these spins and blah, 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 and this is the very, step-by-step thing. And then as soon as you kind of move higher than that, then there's splits, there's shoulder mounts, there's Aishas, there's, everything. And it's kind of like, whoa. So that becomes overwhelming.
And it's like exciting, right? Because you're like, ooh, all these moves are now available to me now.
Yeah. Part shiny object syndrome, like, oh, I'm going to do everything, and then part overwhelm.
Right. It's like, okay, let me pick this first. Let's get good at that. And then because, we've seen it where people want to do all the skills and they kind of do, but they all look average.
Yeah.
Like, I want to nail, I rather have a few that are like golden and then others that are like, they're looking good, but they can be improved upon. Instead of just the totality of it being like meh.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there was just one thing you could encourage every pole dancer to take away, what would it be?
It would be to, yes, this is going to sound cheesy, but it's important. Yes, you are on your own journey. And I say that because we are all individuals. What's going to work for us might not work for someone else. And you have to be willing to experiment on yourself and be open to different possibilities. And again, shift your expectations. They're fine to have, but know that they don't have to be set in stone. And if something needs to change and adjust, it's okay to make adjustments to those expectations and try something else and not get wrapped up in, again, what everyone else is doing. What something works for another, it might work for you or will not, but you only know by trying. Instead of giving up initially and be like, I don't know. How would you know unless you give it a go? So, and that stems again from being on your own journey, because being on your own journey reminds you that you have to experiment. You have to track. Because what we can't track, we can't manage. So realizing that being on our own quest requires us to do the work for ourselves and giving us the opportunity to learn from ourselves. We can't learn and evolve if we don't know where we came from. So the journey is important, but being intentional and thoughtful about the entire process, I think, is what's going to help us evolve better and not get us into that woe is me mindset where the woe is me demons start to creep up, because they always do. Being ironclad about what we know about ourselves, what we've experimented with ourselves, knowing what works for us, and being willing to learn and try something new, I think is going to help us, is going to help manage those urges to just give up a lot better. Yeah. I love that, being on your own journey. That's why I, named the podcast Pole Adventures. Look, that mindset is really, really important, because, no one else is going to be able to do it. Right.
For you.
Exactly. You do it. You got to do it in the end. And just knowing what you went through gives you perspective. It gives you perspective about where you started with the motivation piece. Now, seeing how you evolved, you're more likely to stick to it.
Yeah. And I know that you have online courses and training to help people stick with their progress and progress. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Thank you. Yes, I have my online coaching service where I work with clients in nutrition, exercise programming, stress management, sleep quality. I also have my virtual classes where we hold half-hour flex and 45-minute flex, more general flexibility. We don't get a little too crazy, but if I ever hold a workshop virtually, I'll be sure to share that information online. And I also offer private Zoom sessions to connect with people who are not local, of course, to help them with their alignment, whatever goals they might have, whether it be strength goals or flexibility goals. So that is what I offer on the platform.
Awesome. And where can our explorers best find you?
You can find me on Instagram. I am Kinky Sweat there. I also have my website, kinkysweatnyc.com, where you can find links to not only the questionnaire if you wish to apply for online coaching, but also the links to my virtual classes as well as my private session offerings. Stay tuned. I'm going through a little bit of a rebrand where Kinky Sweat NYC will be soon called archermoves.com. So I'll make sure to share that announcement online, but for now, you could find me there.
Yeah. All the links will be below anyway, so make sure to go check that out, guys. And Alicia, thank you so much for being our guide on making progress and putting in that effort. And thanks to everyone for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this helped, and hopefully I could interact with everyone online. And if they listened and they had any questions about what we discussed, I'm always happy to help in that regard.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we've reached the end of our adventure today. So until next time, remember to stay strong, keep pushing your limits, and embrace your individual journey. Don't forget to grab your free access to the Pole Adventures Compendium, a collection of incredible resources to help you progress on your pole journey. And if you enjoyed today's adventure, make sure to leave a review so other explorers can embark on the journey with us. This is the Pole Adventures podcast, and your next adventure awaits.